Eamon, when you listen to officials, whether it is the president himself posting on Truth Social or it's Hegseth when he rants about what's happening in Iran, you would think that we have obliterated, decimated, that we're close to achieving objectives here. At the same time, we have reporting from Reuters the U.S. can only confirm that about a third of Iran's missile arsenal has been destroyed. And then we know from the New York Times that they are citing multiple officials in this reporting that many of the 13 military bases in the region used by American troops are all but uninhabitable now. What does that signal to you?
Well, it signals a few things. On one hand, the Iranian government and its preparation for this war seems to have been real. Unlike previous attempts in the Middle East, you think of the Iraq War in 2003, the U.S. had unbelievable military success in the first couple of weeks of that war, completely destroyed the Iraqi army, made its way to Baghdad almost unchallenged. And certainly here the U.S. has, with Israel, established air dominance, something that the Iranians had always conceded was not going to be a strong part of their defensive game, if you will, to be able to counter any American-Israeli air assault. But what Iran has been able to do, 28 days or so, 29 days into this war, is be able to continue to fire onto all of its Arab neighbors, as well as Israel and American military installations, every single day of this war. And that is certainly a significant part of their defense strategy. The Iranians had been preparing for what they saw last summer, which was a decapitation strike, a strike in which the upper echelons of both the regime, the government, as well as the military brass would be wiped out. And they had prepared for this with a strategy that they identified as the Mosaic defense, which is basically divide Iran into 31 different units, 31 different governorates or provinces, and each one of those governorates had its own command and control structure in which they were ordered to immediately fire on targets if the regime's upper echelon was attacked, as we saw on February 28th when the U.S. and Israel carried out the strike on Khamenei. What has emerged over the course of the last month of these attacks is that Iran has been very diligent in the way it continues to fight back against these regimes, against the governments in the Middle East as well as Israel. They've been able to match tit for tat, meaning when the U.S. and Israel carry out a strike against a desalination plant or an oil refinery, the Iranians are able to strike back in kind against similar facilities across the region. And in large part, it seems, according to reporting from the New York Times and others, because they're able to get some accurate pinpointing GPS locations from the Russians, which I think is not getting as much attention as it should be throughout this war. It is something that U.S. officials have been concerned about, but clearly has been an advantage to the Iranians.
Well, Eamon, in fact, we actually had some members of Congress touring Russian members of parliament around D.C. this week at a time when the reporting, credible reporting, suggests they are putting American men and women's lives in danger. We also just had Inzamam Rashid on not that long ago in the last hour from Dubai, describing Iranians reacting to Israel hitting nuclear power sites, water treatment sites there, and basically saying exactly what you spelled out there, which is that they may do devastating damage to partners in the Gulf. Susan, politically, what could all of this mean for us? I mean, it seems like we're on the brink of something, as the general said, very dangerous. At the same time, here domestically, we have reporting to our colleague, Jake Traylor here, that the president is bored right now with the war. How can those things all be true at once?
Yeah, well, it does appear that this was a hastily launched and perhaps ill-considered plan that the United States had in terms of its entry into the war and the conflict alongside Israel. Trump has repeatedly said in recent days, in fact, I really thought this was notable, he's confirmed that the United States did not expect Iran to hit back at neighboring countries in the Gulf, to hit back at civilian targets. He said that not once, but multiple times. I think that's really remarkable, especially given that Iran had repeatedly said that that was a possibility, number one. Number two, I'm just frankly blown away at the idea that the Strait of Hormuz being closed was not more carefully considered as an option by the Trump administration. And despite a lot of the bluster, what we've seen, given that that has been the case for a couple of weeks now, and the U.S. has not had an effective strategy for reopening it, what that suggests is that they didn't have a viable plan for what to do if Iran went in this very, very obvious direction. To your question of how does this end and what is the political fallout, that depends on how long it goes and how much pain is inflicted on the global economy as well as not just on the American economy. And given that question, I think what we're seeing is Trump still spinning his wheels, casting about to reopen the strait, and nothing so far has emerged short of this threatened possibility of American boots on the ground that might actually accomplish it. The Pakistani foreign minister, the Pakistanis have been asked to mediate in recent days. I thought he came out with a point that's really worth underscoring for your viewers. What is the strategic goal of the Americans right now? He was asked. It looks to him like the strategic goal is reopening the Strait of Hormuz, which of course wouldn't have been closed if we hadn't launched the war in the first place. It's hard to portray that even for someone who casually inverts the truth like Donald Trump. It's really hard to portray that as a victory. And so we can't calculate the cost yet because we don't know how much longer it's going to go on for Iran to have the world economy in a chokehold.
Eamon, you know this region well. You've reported from so much of the Gulf. And I'm curious in your conversations, but also just your personal observations, what you think this could do to our relationships in the region long term. If our own partners, as they watch all this unfold, can barely figure out what our objectives are. And if, I guess, the new objective is to get us back to what the status quo was just a couple weeks ago.
Look, I've been speaking to a lot of officials across the GCC, and there is definitely a divide there. If you look, for example, yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, the ambassador of the United Arab Emirates, as well as other ministers, high-ranking ministers who are here in the U.S., they've talked about the importance of maintaining the U.S. relationship and cooperation going forward. They are also encouraging the United States to fix what it broke, which is this: there was a situation in the Middle East where at least there wasn't missiles raining down on the entire GCC and the global economy was still functioning. All of that now has been shattered. The sense of security has been shattered. And so there is a push by some within the GCC for the Americans to finish the job. What does that actually mean? Does that mean regime change? Does that mean boots on the ground? Does that mean getting the situation back to a status quo where Iran and its Arab neighbors live with this kind of de facto respect and not a state of war? That's unclear. But there are also other GCC countries who feel very disappointed with what the United States has done. They have been investing in this relationship with President Trump and the Americans for decades in building a security umbrella. That has, for the large part, withheld the Iranian missile and drone strikes, but it is not something that can be sustained forever. And as a result of that, they want the United States to engage in a diplomatic solution that ends this war and brings about a stability to the region that allows for long-term prosperity. I think what they're most frustrated about is that the president started this war without as much giving them any indication that it's going to happen or preparation. And even though they told Iran that they will not allow the U.S. to participate on these strikes or use their territory to participate in these strikes, the Iranians did not take that into consideration. And so going forward, you're going to have a situation where Iran is either emboldened, even if it has been militarily weakened, but it is emboldened and willing to lash out against its neighbors, or they're going to have a country that potentially collapses if this war continues to go on, in which case you're going to have a failed state producing a refugee crisis run by a host of different militias and factions and sectarian ideologies that could bleed into the GCC. And so they're watching this moment very carefully, very nervous, and I have to say, not with a lot of confidence in the American leadership that they're going to be making a decision that has their best interest at heart.
General, I have to ask you about some shocking reporting in the New York Times today that Hegseth has struck 2 black and 2 female officers from a possible 1-star general promotion. This is a highly unusual move, they report, that has prompted some senior military officials to question whether the officers are being singled out because of their race and or their gender. And 2 of the officers, again, they're black women. And as this comes at a time when the majority of the leadership is, of course, still white men, there are some pretty stunning quotes in this piece, including allegations that one aide directly said that the president wouldn't want to be standing next to a black female military leader when speaking, when presenting. I'm sure you've seen this, and I guess I want your reaction to what this represents about the leadership at the Pentagon, but also what this could do to the morale, the functioning of the military at such a crucial time.
Well, this is nothing new. This has been going on since the day Trump was sworn in. There's been a very direct attack on the armed forces in general and their senior leadership over the notion that they're woke, that promotions are not based on merit, that the military actions were not sufficiently muscular. And I hate to say this, but Hegseth in some ways looks like a comic book tough guy. And so I think increasingly inside the Pentagon, there's an element of chaos and hysteria to decision making. But let me go back and endorse a comment Eamon made. Our remaining objectives in the Gulf War are stop the nuclear program and open the Gulf of Hormuz. Each of them are in danger. You cannot stop a nuclear weapons program unless you have inspectors on the ground with robust rules of investigation. That's not going to happen under the current approach by the United States or Israel. The second thing you got to do is you got to open the Gulf of Hormuz. I think the Iranians can outlast us, and no U.S. Navy warfighting vessel wants to be in the Persian Gulf, shallow water, restricted maneuver space, and subject to instant attack by mini subs, floating naval mines, cruise ballistic missiles. It's just a nightmare of an operation. So the whole notion of forcing passage, even if the NATO allies joined us, is really tenuous. This is probably not going to work. We have to have a diplomatic solution.